My parents let my abuser move back home because he changed. So I left, cut contact, and built a life they'll only see on news articles. I'm a 25-year-old woman, and if there's one label I've worn like a second skin my whole life, it's the easy one. It sounds harmless, maybe even flattering, right? But in my family, easy was code for invisible. It meant I didn't make waves. I didn't scream when things were unfair. I didn't lash out when I was hurt. And I was expected to stay that way, quiet, low maintenance, and ever forgiving. My older brother Connor was the complete opposite. He was chaos wrapped in charm. He'd punch a hole in the wall one day and sweet-talk his way out of it the next. He could be cruel, emotionally, physically, but my parents always found a way to excuse it. He's going through a phase, they'd say. Boys will be boys. Or my favorite. He's got a lot of emotions and doesn't know how to express them. But apparently I knew how to express mine too well, by not expressing them at all. If Connor ruined something of mine, I was told to share. If he snapped at me, I had to watch my tone. If he failed a class, they got him a tutor. When I aced mine, just a nod. No praise, no hugs. Just the expectation that I'd keep delivering quietly. I can't even count how many times I heard the phrase, be the bigger person. It was their mantra, chanted at me every time Connor lost control. Every time I cried. Every time I stood up for myself, I started to believe that maybe I was supposed to hurt in silence. Maybe that was love. Keeping the peace by swallowing your pain. But deep down, something in me always whispered, this isn't right. And that whisper, it would eventually become a scream, but not yet. Not before things got worse. Much worse. The first time Connor hurt me physically, I was 11. He was 14, and we were fighting over the TV remote. Something stupid, something normal. But he didn't just shove me. He grabbed me by the hair and yanked me off the couch so hard my head hit the floor. I remember the dull thud. The shock. The ringing in my ears. When I ran crying to my mom, clutching the back of my skull, she sighed and said, "Don't antagonize him, sweetheart. You know how he gets." And that became the template. I learned very early that pain when caused by Connor didn't count. By the time I was in high school, the abuse had evolved. It wasn't just bruises or scratches, it was psychological warfare. He'd go through my diary and mock my insecurities out loud at the dinner table. He once stole my phone and sent cruel messages to my friends, pretending to be me. I lost friendships over that. I tried standing up to him. Once, he slammed me into a closet door so hard it cracked. When my parents came running in, I thought, finally, they'll see it. Finally, they'll believe me. But Connor started crying. He spun some twisted story about how I'd attacked him first, how he was just defending himself, how he didn't mean to hurt me. My mom held him. My dad looked at me like I was the problem. That night, I went to bed with an ice pack on my shoulder and a growing knot in my stomach. It wasn't just that my brother was hurting me. It was that my parents kept handing him the knife and asking me not to bleed. I began to wonder what would happen if one day he went too far, and worse. What would they do if he did? I was 17 the night Connor put a knife to my throat. It still feels strange to say it that plainly, like I'm exaggerating, like I've made it too cinematic in my memory. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was real, cold, sharp, and terrifying. It started like it always did, with something petty. He'd stolen $20 from my wallet, and I called him out. I didn't even yell. I just walked into the kitchen and said, "Give it back." He laughed. That cocky, smug laugh he always used when he knew no one would hold him accountable. "What, $20? He said, flashing me a grin like he wanted me to swing first. I turned to walk away because I knew where this was going, but he grabbed my wrist and slammed me against the fridge. My head bounced off the handle. I remember the metallic taste in my mouth before I screamed. That's when he grabbed the knife. Just a steak knife. But when it's pressed beneath your jawline by someone who's shaking with rage, it doesn't feel small. It feels final. His eyes were wild. His breath smelled like weed and Monster energy drinks. And for a split second I thought, this is it. My scream must have alerted the neighbors, because the cops showed up before my parents even got home. Connor was arrested, handcuffed on our front lawn in full view of the neighborhood. I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, my hands trembling so violently I couldn't hold my phone. But the real betrayal came later. My parents bailed him out the same night. No tears, no hugs. Just my mom's angry voice saying, "You didn't have to call the police." That was the last straw. That night, I started packing a bag, because if no one was going to protect me, then I would have to protect myself. I turned 18 3 months later, and I left the same day my high school graduation cap hit the floor. No long goodbye. No family dinner. Just a scribbled note on the kitchen table that said, "Don't call me. I'm done." I emptied my savings, packed a duffel bag, and took a Greyhound bus to a college 2 states away. It wasn't even my top choice, I just needed distance. Real physical distance. The first night in my dorm was the first time I slept without flinching at every creak of the floorboards. No yelling. No slamming doors. No knife blocks within arm's reach, just silence. And for a while, silence was enough. I didn't tell anyone my story. Not my roommate. Not my professors. I wore a mask of normalcy so well, I almost started to believe I was normal. I worked 2 part-time jobs, library assistant and weekend barista, to cover what scholarships didn't. And when I was too exhausted to cry, I called it progress. Therapy helped, eventually. But healing wasn't linear. I'd break down in the shampoo aisle if a bottle reminded me of home. I'd panic at sudden noises, and I still checked locks twice, sometimes 3 times before bed. My parents texted occasionally. Mostly on birthdays or holidays, "We miss you." "Come home for Thanksgiving?" "Connor's doing better now." I never replied. I didn't owe them closure. What they called doing better, I called forgetting. They wanted to forget, to scrub the bloodstains from our family history and pretend nothing ever happened, but I couldn't. Forget the feeling of cold steel under my jaw, and I sure as hell couldn't forget the sound of silence when I needed their voices the most. So I stayed gone until they gave me a reason to break that silence, and it shattered everything all over again. It came out of nowhere, an email from my mom with the subject line, "Connor wants to reconnect." I stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it. My palms were sweaty, my throat dry. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. The email was long, overly polished, like she'd drafted it 5 times to get the wording just right. She said Connor had found faith, had been sober for over a year, and had started volunteering with a local youth group. She described him like some Hallmark movie character who just needed a second chance. Then came the part that made me feel physically sick. "We've invited him to move back home. He needs a stable environment, and we believe he's truly changed. We hope this can be a chance for all of us to heal as a family. Maybe you could come visit soon." No apology. No acknowledgement. Not even a half-hearted, "We understand if this is hard for you." Just a smiley face emoji and a photo attached of them hugging in front of the house. My house. The one I ran from like it was on fire. My body felt like it disconnected from my brain. My vision blurred. I kept reading that line over and over. He's changed. Changed? Did changed mean the years of gaslighting vanished? Did changed mean my scarred teenage self no longer existed? I didn't reply, but I couldn't sleep that night. I kept picturing him in my old bedroom, eating at my old table, walking through the halls where I once bled, cried, hid. They were letting my abuser move back in, rewriting history in real time. And somehow I was supposed to be grateful. That email didn't just reopen wounds. It told me the infection had never left. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was the years of silence finally boiling over. But I picked up the phone and called them. It rang 3 times before my dad answered, his voice chipper like we were catching up after a vacation. "Sweetheart." What a surprise, I skipped the pleasantries. "You're letting Connor move back in?" There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to feel rehearsed. My mom must have taken the phone because suddenly I heard her voice. Soft, syrupy, careful. "Honey, listen. He's really changed. You should see him. He's trying so hard." I clenched the phone so tight my fingers ached. He held a knife to my throat. Silence, then a sigh. A long, dramatic sigh. "We've all made mistakes," she said. "But you can't hold on to the past forever." I couldn't breathe. "I didn't make a mistake, Mom. I was attacked. I was traumatized. And you, both of you let him get away with it." Again and again she started crying. Or pretending to. You don't understand how hard this is on us. Do you think it was easy watching our family fall apart? We're just trying to rebuild. That's when it hit me like a freight train. They weren't calling this an act of forgiveness. They were calling it reconstruction, as if the past could be neatly paved over like a cracked driveway. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, if you let him back into that house, you'll never hear from me again. My mom's voice dropped to a whisper. Don't be dramatic. You're better than this. No, I wasn't better. I was done. And as I hung up, my hands were shaking. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't from fear. It was from clarity. A week after that call, I got a DM on Instagram. The username was familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. It was Connor. I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen like it was a landmine. I told myself not to open it, but curiosity, or maybe fear, won. I tapped it was short. Too short. Hey, no hard feelings. We were just dumb kids. I'm in a better place now. Let's talk sometime. Coffee? He ended it with a smiley face. Like we were old classmates catching up after a decade apart. Like he hadn't broken me into pieces and left me to tape myself back together, alone. I sat on my bed, staring at that message for what felt like hours. My chest was tight, but not with sadness. It was rage. We were just dumb kids. He was 17 when he threatened me with a knife. He was 18 when he broke my ribs in a shoving match over the remote. He wasn't a child, and I wasn't a willing participant in some teenage sibling feud. I didn't respond, but I did go private. I blocked him. I deleted my LinkedIn. I scrubbed any trace of where I worked, lived, or studied. I suddenly realized how easy it would be for him to find me, if he really wanted to. But something about the message wasn't just nerve-rattling. It was clarifying. He hadn't changed. He'd just learned new tools. Softer language. A calmer tone. But it was still manipulation. Still erasure. And if my parents were willing to let him back in with open arms, then maybe I didn't need to burn bridges. Maybe I needed to build a new road altogether, one where they couldn't follow, because I was done surviving. Now, I was going to rise. After Connor's message, something shifted in me, not immediately, not loudly. It was a quiet unraveling, a thread pulled loose that I didn't bother tying back up. I didn't scream or post some dramatic rant. I just erased myself. I changed my phone number, deleted old email accounts, moved out of my shared apartment without telling anyone except my closest friend. I even filed paperwork to legally change part of my name. Nothing drastic, just enough to make me harder to trace. I stopped checking their socials. I stopped imagining reconciliation. I stopped hoping for apologies that were never coming. It wasn't out of spite. It was survival. My therapist called it strategic no contact. I called it breathing for the first time. I got a new job in a city I'd never even visited before. Freelance design work. For a startup with no corporate strings attached. I worked remote, traveled light, and paid in cash whenever I could. I became the kind of person who left no digital footprints. Ghost mode, in real life. And with every step I took away from them, I felt stronger. There were moments of doubt. Nights when I stared at my ceiling wondering if I was being cruel. If I was becoming the villain in their story. But then I'd remember the smell of antiseptic in the ER. The cold linoleum under my back. The knife. The silence. I wasn't being cruel. I was choosing myself, for once. And as I sat in a small apartment above a coffee shop in a city where no one knew my name, I made a promise to myself. If they wanted to forget what happened, then I'd make sure the only version of me they'd ever see again would be on their screens. I wish I could say I rebuilt myself out of hope or optimism, but I didn't. I built myself out of spite. Out of rage. Out of this simmering need to prove that I was more than the scared, silent girl they left behind. I enrolled in night courses, branding, digital design, marketing strategy. I worked 10-hour days and studied until dawn. I took gigs no one wanted. Ugly websites for shady clients, logos for bands that would never make it, social media audits for people who paid in Starbucks gift cards. I said yes to everything, and then slowly, things changed. A friend of a client introduced me to a woman running a sustainability startup. She needed a full branding package, fast. I stayed up 3 nights straight to deliver it. When she launched, my work was praised by a major eco-tech blog. That snowballed into more contracts, more clients, more income. At 24, I registered my own digital consultancy. At 25, I had 2 part-time employees and was featured in a design magazine as the quiet force behind emerging brands. The irony didn't escape me. The quiet force. They had called me quiet my whole life, and now that quiet had become my superpower. Still, I never reached out to my parents. I didn't unblock them. I didn't soften, because every time I thought about sending a postcard or a holiday text, I pictured Connor laughing in their kitchen. I pictured my mom's arms around him. I pictured my dad shaking his hand and calling it forgiveness. No. They could have their version of family. I was building something else. Not out of revenge, but out of purpose. And when I finally stepped on the stage, for my first speaking event, a conference with 500 industry leaders, I looked out at the crowd and smiled. They would never know what it took for me to stand there. But I did. It was supposed to be one of the proudest nights of my life. A major design expo invited me as the keynote speaker, me, the girl who once hid in bathroom stalls to escape her brother's taunts. I wore a navy blazer that made me feel like someone important. My hair was curled, my slides were prepped, and my speech was tight. The auditorium lights dimmed. My name lit up across a massive screen, and then, as I stepped out to speak, I saw them. Third row. Dead center, my parents. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might fall. For a second, I genuinely believed I was hallucinating. But no, there was my dad straightening his tie. My mom clutching her purse like it was a trophy. And in the empty seat beside them, one I could only assume they'd saved, was a copy of the event program. My face printed on the front. They had come to watch me, without invitation. Without warning, the lights blinded me. The crowd applauded. I had no choice but to keep walking forward. I gave the speech. All of it. Every word I'd written at 2 a.m. with tears in my eyes. Every anecdote about building your identity from the rubble of rejection. People laughed. Some cried, but my eyes never met theirs. Afterward, while shaking hands and posing for photos, a staff member handed me a small envelope. Some folks said they were family, he explained. Asked me to pass this along. Inside was a handwritten note on floral stationery. We're so proud of you. Let's put the past behind us. Love, Mom and Dad. No Connor. No apology. Just a sweeping gesture of pretend peace. I walked outside, sat on the curb in my heels, and cried harder than I had in years. Not because they showed up, but because even now, they still thought this story was about them. 3 weeks after the expo, I submitted a piece to a major online publication. It was titled, Success is Not Forgiveness. I didn't name names. I didn't drag them publicly. I didn't even mention the knife or the police report. But I laid bare the truth of my journey, the emotional toll of being expected to forgive people who never took responsibility, of being asked to perform healing while the people who broke me cheered from the sidelines. The piece went viral. Thousands of comments poured in. People, strangers, sharing stories of parents who defended abusers, of families who swept trauma under the rug, of survivors who built empires from the ashes of silence. One comment stuck with me. You don't owe anyone access to the healed version of you they refused to help build. It echoed in my head like gospel. My parents saw the article. I know because 2 days later I got a message from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Your mom is devastated, she wrote. She said you've twisted everything. Twisted? All I had done was tell the truth. The real truth, not the filtered family photo version they curated for holidays. That was the moment I realized I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to admit anything or fall on their knees or beg for redemption. I just needed to let go of the invisible thread that had kept me tethered to their approval, and I did. Archived the cousin's message. Then, I sat on my apartment balcony, glass of wine in hand, staring at the city lights as if they belonged to me now. Because in a way, they did. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom. And this? This was what it finally felt like. 6 months later, I rang the opening bell at NASDAQ Me. Just me. Standing there in a tailored white suit, flashing on screens across the country as my company went public. The cameras clicked. Reporters shouted questions. A bouquet of white roses sat on the podium, not from my family, but from my team. People who actually showed up for me. When the confetti dropped, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But I didn't. I just stood there and breathed in the moment like it was oxygen, clean, unscented by guilt. The news segment aired that night on 3 networks. Youngest solo female founder to IPO in her sector. They said my name like it mattered. I knew they saw it. I don't know if they watched it live, or caught it on a rerun, or read about it in one of the business journals my dad used to collect on the kitchen table like holy texts. But I know they saw it. They had to. I imagine them pausing the screen, zooming in. My mom whispering, "She looks so grown up." My dad saying, "We always knew she'd do big things." No, they didn't. They knew how to silence me. They knew how to protect the son who nearly ruined me. They knew how to write letters and show up uninvited and pretend they were part of the story. But they didn't know how to see me. Not really. And now, the only version of me they'd ever see again would be on screens, in magazines, in articles they couldn't edit. A version they couldn't reach. Couldn't distort. Couldn't hug into submission. I didn't need to slam the door in their faces. I just needed to build a stage they could never step onto. And I had. The silence I gave them now wasn't fear, it was power.